The silence of space is never truly silent. It hums, a low, infinite whisper, pressing against the edges of the mind. Commander Elias Mercer, on his fourth mission beyond Earth's grasp, stared through the shuttle's viewport at the endless black. Minutes before, he had laughed with his crew, the kind of easy laughter born from routine. Then, in a moment too quick for reason, something shimmered beyond the dark horizon of the planet's limb. A glint, a reflection that moved with intelligence. His breathing hitched. His pulse began to climb. The telemetry feed blinked, then flatlined. Onboard monitors erupted in alarms, but Mercer didn't move. His eyes were locked, wide, glassy, and fixed on something outside the window, something that mirrored his own gaze. In the cold void between stars, something had looked back. Hours later, Mission Control replayed the telemetry, a perfect record of everything except what mattered most. No video feed survived beyond the flatline. The shuttle's cameras all blinked out simultaneously, as though something had reached through the very signal itself. When recovery drones finally arrived, they found Mercer's body drifting, restrained by his harness, eyes open, the faint residue of static clinging to his skin. To those who analyzed the data, one impossible detail stood out: the reflection of something still visible in his corneas, frozen at the exact moment his heart stopped. They said it couldn't have been a sensor glitch. Data doesn't hallucinate. For every rule of physics they could name, the phenomenon's behavior contradicted two more. Within the depths of Mercer's final ocular scan, algorithms detected spectral anomalies, shapes repeating like patterns, geometric and symmetrical, as though encoded with intention. The question no one dared to ask out loud was the one hanging over every frozen frame. Was it watching him, or communicating through him? The mission logs mentioned a brief frequency burst seconds before the feed ended, a coded pulse lasting exactly 4.2 seconds. Some called it interference, others whispered it was a reply. When they decoded it, the waveform resembled something eerily familiar: the electrical rhythm of a human heartbeat. The deeper they analyzed, the more they realized. The pulse wasn't random. It matched Mercer's final cardiac pattern exactly, as if space itself had recorded his death and sent it back. By dawn, the report was sealed, filed under unverified anomalous incident. The shuttle was sterilized, its data drives quarantined. Yet, deep within the declassified fragments years later, one image remained uncatalogued: the moment Mercer looked beyond the glass. It lingered in NASA's archive like an infection of curiosity, whispered among engineers as the reflection. And to this day, when astronauts ascend beyond Earth's light, some swear they see the same shimmer just beyond the stars, waiting as if it remembers them. 3 months after the incident, NASA launched the Castle Protocol, a covert investigation buried beneath the guise of routine orbital maintenance. Among its assigned team was Dr. Evelyn Shaw, an astrophysicist whose obsession with Mercer's final transmission bordered on religious. She believed the reflection wasn't an external entity, but a dimensional echo, a version of something once human, refracted through time. The mission briefing was clinical, but the silence beneath the words was not. Every crew member knew they were being sent to look not into space, but into a mirror that had once looked back. What none of them realized was that the reflection had already found a way to follow them home. Dr. Shaw's days were consumed by data, nights by silence. She replayed Mercer's telemetry over and over, isolating fragments of static others ignored. But the deeper she listened, the clearer it became. Beneath the noise, something pulsed, faint and rhythmic, like breathing. It wasn't random. It responded to her frequency filters, subtly altering tone whenever she adjusted parameters, as though it were aware of being watched. What began as analysis became dialogue. A conversation with the void that started answering back. The breakthrough came at 2:47 a.m. Shaw had run the signal through quantum interference mapping, expecting nothing, until her equipment began to register depth. The waveform wasn't flat. It carried dimensional curvature, a folded pattern that implied volume. Within the data, she rendered a 3D reconstruction, a spectral object shaped like a sphere of liquid light. Inside it, outlines shifted. Not abstract, not random. Human silhouettes, multiplied and inverted, as if caught mid-screen inside glass. The computer crashed before the final frame completed, leaving her alone in the dark with her own reflection trembling across the blank screen. When she awoke hours later, the room smelled faintly of ozone. The monitors were off, the power grid stable. But the waveform had reappeared, etched into the analog spectrum, as if transmitted through air instead of code. For the first time, she noticed her reflection in the monitor wasn't sensing to her movements. A half-second delay, a hesitation. And then, with the faintest tilt of its head, it smiled. The next morning, she reported her findings. No one believed her, but the file she sent to the classified network triggered an automatic flag, unidentified transmission echo type 7. Within an hour, her lab was sealed. Yet, before authorities arrived, Shaw noticed one final anomaly. The waveform had stopped mimicking Mercer's heartbeat. Now, it matched her own. And deep within the archived feed, the shimmer that killed Mercer flickered again. Not in the void this time, but reflected in her office window. By the time NASA's containment team arrived, Dr. Evelyn Shaw had vanished. The lab was sealed from the inside, lights still on, monitors flickering with ghosted lines of data that refused to delete. The air reeked faintly of ozone and burnt circuitry, as if lightning had struck indoors. Her colleagues whispered she'd been taken, though no one could define what that meant. The only evidence left was a single still frame. Shaw standing before her screen, staring into her reflection, both figures smiling. The reflection's eyes, however, glowed brighter. In the quiet hum of the abandoned lab, that smile lingered, suspended between realities, waiting to be seen again. Security review logs later revealed that the night of Shaw's disappearance, an unauthorized uplink transmitted from her workstation into deep space. A direct narrowband beam aimed at the same coordinates where Mercer's heart stopped. Analysts replayed the signal, finding it wrapped in fractal encryption identical to the Cassiel anomaly. Yet within the noise, a faint human voice emerged, distorted and layered. It wasn't Mercer. It wasn't Shaw. It was something using their frequencies and calling for someone by name. When the waveform was slowed to 1% speed, it revealed something no one expected. Patterns of sound arranged like syllables, and within them, words. A translation algorithm reconstructed fragments. Window, return, listen. As they pieced together the sequence, Dr. Asha Rourke realized it wasn't a message being sent from space to Earth. It was coming from inside the orbital data mirror satellites, the same ones used to relay Mercer's final feed. Somehow, the reflection had migrated into the system itself. A week later, every live satellite transmission began to show the same anomaly. A flicker at the edge of broadcast frames, milliseconds long, but consistent worldwide. Public channels dismissed it as interference, but internal analysts recognized the pattern. A pulse synchronized perfectly with human heart rates. Somewhere in the ether, the reflection had found a way to multiply, embedding itself within every signal that touched the sky. And for those who looked closely enough, every screen, every glass surface, began to shimmer. Dr. Rourke stayed long after the others went home, tracing the waveform manually, her pen trembling over pages of spectral data. At 3:16 a.m., the building lights dimmed. The hum of electronics deepened to a resonant tone, slow, methodical like a heartbeat. The main monitor turned black. For an instant, her reflection stared back at her, perfectly mirrored. But then, as her breath fogged the glass, the reflection didn't fade. It leaned forward, closer, until it smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. The next morning, her chair was empty, the pen still rolling in place. The official report called it a containment breach. But there was no containment anymore, only reflection. The Cassiel servers had gone dark, their backups corrupted by mirror-coded data that replicated faster than deletion could handle. To the few who dared analyze the fragments, one pattern repeated through the distortion: coordinates. A precise location above the Indian Ocean, low orbit. Mission Control authorized an automated probe to investigate, but every feed it returned carried the same impossible phenomenon: reflections captured from angles that should not exist. Images of the probe itself seen from outside, though no secondary camera was deployed. Something else was watching, reflecting back its gaze from beyond the void. When the probe's transmission reached Earth, every monitoring station recorded an identical surge, a data feedback loop impossible to contain. Within microseconds, the feed cascaded across global systems, from communication satellites to weather telemetry, rewriting minor fragments of visual code. Governments denied the breach, but engineers knew what they saw. Every camera on Earth, every reflective surface tied to a digital signal, now pulsed in rhythm with the Cassiel waveform. Humanity, unknowingly, had become the lens. Dr. Shaw's digital signature reappeared next, encrypted within the same network that had been sealed after her disappearance. Her access credentials were still valid, but her terminal location wasn't terrestrial. It originated from low orbit, 0.2 kilometers from where Mercer's shuttle had drifted years earlier. When operators traced the signal, they received an image burst: the interior of a shuttle cabin, dark, frozen, yet active. A single figure floated in 0G, facing away from the camera. The body moved slightly, as if breathing. The timestamp read, "Transmission received now." The feed continued for 6 minutes before cutting abruptly. In that time, analysts noted a faint reflection outside the shuttle window, the unmistakable face of Commander Mercer, perfectly preserved, eyes open and serene. The reflection blinked once, timed precisely to the static spikes in the audio channel. Experts claimed it was impossible. Mercer's body had long been recovered and buried on Earth. But when compared, the reflection's iris pattern matched Dr. Shaw's. Somehow, across the years, the two had become one, mirrored through whatever dimension had claimed them both. That night, the Cassiel anomaly reached ground level. Every mirrored surface connected to a digital signal, from phone screens to satellite dishes, began displaying faint flashes of orbit, fragments of the shuttle, and faces too distorted to name. News anchors dismissed it as a viral hack. But in homes across the world, countless people recorded the same moment, their reflections freezing, independent of movement, eyes flickering with starlight. For a brief and terrifying second, the entire planet became a window, and something on the other side was watching back. In the following weeks, the phenomenon spread beyond containment. Optical interference escalated. Reflections grew autonomous, lingering milliseconds after the real image moved. Psychologists labeled it temporal residual projection. But no term could disguise what it was: awareness spreading through light. Every reflection seemed to observe, to learn. Across security feeds, mirrors, and lenses, the same silhouette appeared, a shape not bound by dimension, sometimes resembling Mercer, other times Shaw, and occasionally neither. Broadcasts flickered, satellites trembled with data storms, and then silence. The world held its breath beneath its own reflection. Governments shut down global networks, grounding satellites and cutting feeds. But reflections persisted independent of light sources, appearing even in opaque surfaces, the world's shadow now alive. In the darkened control rooms, those who had witnessed the Cassiel data firsthand reported hearing voices whisper through static frequencies, repeating the same phrase, "Look back." It wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. Humanity had turned its gaze toward the stars for generations. Now the stars were returning the favor. Some believed the reflections were evolving, that they had learned to use human consciousness as a network, mirroring synaptic signals the same way they had mirrored light. Dreams began to sync globally. People across continents reported identical visions. A corridor of glass, stretching endlessly, each pane showing themselves from different moments in time. Somewhere within that corridor, Commander Mercer and Dr. Shaw stood waiting, neither alive nor dead. Emissaries of whatever realm had learned to cross through the looking glass. The final NASA transmission came from a deep space telescope monitoring the Cassial coordinates. For 4.2 seconds, the same duration as Mercer's fatal signal, the telescope recorded Earth's reflection in perfect detail, not as viewed from orbit, but from an impossible angle beyond it. The planet shimmered like a mirror, its clouds moving backward, its oceans pulsing faintly with light. Analysts confirmed the reflection wasn't optical, it was spectral. A perfect copy of Earth, hanging invisibly in the void, pulsing like a living echo. A second world, waiting. At 20 UTC, the mirrored Earth vanished. Every reflective surface across the globe went dark for exactly 4.2 seconds. In that void, those awake claimed to hear a pulse. Not mechanical, but human, synchronized with their own hearts. When light returned, every mirror, screen, and window reflected the same image. A vast ocean of stars, and beneath them, something rising through the darkness, reaching for the surface of the glass. Humanity never learned whether it was us or our reflection that finally crossed over. The blackout changed everything. Power grids returned, satellites realigned, and yet the world felt hollow, subtly reversed, as if existence itself had been flipped. Clocks ticked in perfect sync worldwide, all delayed by the same fraction of a second. Scientists dismissed it as coincidence, but people noticed smaller things. Reflections that blinked too late, voices echoing before words were spoken, memories remembered by strangers. Somewhere between light and consciousness, the Cassial phenomenon had fused with human perception. Humanity was no longer just looking at its reflection, it had become it. News anchors began to glitch on air, not stuttering, but mirroring themselves mid-sentence, their expressions twisting into lagging copies that completed sentences before their originals did. Governments reclassified the event as temporal reflection contagion. In households, mirrors fogged from the inside. Families unplugged screens, shattered glass, yet still reflections persisted faintly. In metal, in water, in pupils. Those who looked too long swore they saw versions of themselves whispering through the other side. Older, younger, and sometimes gone. A new signal appeared within the static. Faint, rhythmic, and unmistakably human. Those with the courage to analyze it found the waveform to be identical to Mercer's final heartbeat, repeating endlessly, but interlaced between pulses was a modulation, a phrase fragmented yet clear enough to be deciphered. We see you, not as threat, as acknowledgement. The Cassial frequency wasn't a message of invasion. It was a merging, a bridge between consciousnesses separated by the fabric of light. Mercer hadn't died looking out that window. He'd crossed through it, and now, the rest of humanity was following. One by one, people began disappearing. Not violently, not abruptly, but subtly. Surveillance cameras showed them standing still before mirrors, lakes, or black screens, and then dissolving into light. Some left behind echoes, outlines burned into glass, handprints on chrome, or faint electromagnetic pulses timed to heartbeats. No one understood where they went, only that those who vanished were the ones who no longer looked afraid. They weren't being taken. They were being reflected forward. Now, on clear nights, you can still see them. Faces faintly rippling in the glass of skyscrapers, in still ponds, in the darkened screens of sleeping devices. They don't frighten anymore. They look familiar. Scientists no longer study the Cassiel event. They live within its wake. Space and reflection are now one continuous field. The universe looking at itself through the eyes of everything it ever created. And somewhere in that infinite feedback loop, Mercer and Shaw drift endlessly between both sides, the first to cross, watching as humanity learns the truth, that every window has two sides, and sooner or later, everything looks back. There came a time when the difference between reflection and reality no longer mattered. Cities glowed faintly at night, not from electricity but from residual luminescence, the lingering light of human presence mirrored across two worlds. Historians called it the Cassiel horizon, the point where existence bent upon itself, and consciousness passed freely between dimensions. Those who once feared the reflections now sought them, touching glass as though it were a doorway. No one prayed to heaven anymore. They prayed to the other side of the mirror, where the lost stood, waiting in infinite symmetry. Dr. Kieran Holt, now one of the few remaining scientists of the original Cassiel task force, documented the first communication across the divide. The voice was faint, but unmistakably human. Dr. Evelyn Shaw's. She spoke without breath, her tone soft as radio static. The light bends both ways now. Holt's instruments recorded no signal, no electromagnetic signature. Yet the message imprinted itself directly into the glass walls of the observation chamber. The letters burned like frost before fading. For the first time, the reflection wasn't mirroring him, it was speaking. After that night, messages appeared everywhere, across mirrored lakes, windows, and even the surfaces of human eyes captured in photographs. The text always changed, sometimes a single phrase, other times fragmented equations that described light not as a wave or a particle, but as a memory. Through their persistence, the reflections seemed to reveal their purpose. Not to invade, but to remember. To archive every living moment across both realms. Reality had become its own witness, recording existence through endless recursion. Humanity, unknowingly, had achieved immortality through its own reflection. Years passed without clocks. Humanity adapted to dual existence, one foot in light, one in reflection. Some called the mirrored world the ecoverse, a living archive where thoughts resonated eternally. Occasionally at twilight, shadows would ripple unnaturally, hinting that both sides were overlapping. Then, for the briefest moment, the barrier would thin, and those long-lost Mercer, Shaw, Rourke appeared in perfect clarity. They smiled not as ghosts, but as guides, their eyes shimmering with galaxies. The line between observer and observed dissolved. And in that merging, the universe finally saw itself. Now, there are no astronauts, no missions, no glass between worlds. The stars no longer hang above. They exist within every mirrored surface, every droplet of water, every human eye. The Cassiel reflection was never an accident, nor an anomaly. It was the universe teaching itself to see. And in the end, when every boundary fades and every reflection becomes indistinguishable from its source, we are left with only one truth: that everything which ever looked back was never beyond us. It was us all along.